All right, today's question from the book of What If is, what if you lived in a floating city? So, throughout history, humans have been confined to land masses when establishing permanent living settlements. But what if that's all about to change? What if humans took to the sea, not just to traverse it, but to settle it? If the Seasteading Institute accomplishes its goal of creating the first permanent cities at sea, your future could involve living with water flowing underneath your feet and land being something you see off on the horizon. Originally, the Seasteading Institute envisioned these floating cities establishing themselves as sovereign countries. However, it's shifted its vision to making them new cities for existing countries. These micro cities would be built on movable, floating platforms, each of which could accommodate up to 270 residents. Sound like an impossible idea? From the perspective of the Seasteading Institute, only 30 million people a year already visit floating cities in the form of cruise ships. These ships provide water, food, power, service staff, and safety from the waves at a cost as low as $60 per night. There are also 1,500 oil and gas platforms in the U.S. waters alone. So there are already people living and working and spending lots and lots of time at sea. And humans have developed technology and ways of living out at the sea and away from land for long periods of time already. What if we just did it permanently? These floating cities would simply combine the amenities and engineering of cruise ships and oil platforms to provide people with a permanent life at sea. Now, before we get to the activity, wait till you hear some of these student responses. Steven says, I would move our city somewhere using paddles. Olivia says, I would love it because I will be able to find myself in a different place every day. Imagine that, just floating around the sea. You'd be somewhere different all the time. Philippa says, it would be amazing if we could go living on a floating city. We could go swimming so often and we wouldn't have to go to a pool. And instead of going to the pet store for a fish, you could just catch one. And fishermen don't have to go to the lake. They could just fish right from their front door. Connor says we would run out of food and everything. Well, talk to the fisherman, Connor, right? He also thinks, though, you would use boats as cars. They could use chocolate syrup in the bathtub instead of water, and they would only eat water. Wow, Connor is really excited about living at sea. Edward says that if we lived on floating cities, I would train jellyfish to let me ride them everywhere. It's funny, jellyfish sting, but if you do some research on other jellyfish, I think you'll discover that jellyfish, believe it or not, actually operate as transportation systems for other fish, other sea creatures. So as crazy as this sounds, jellyfish already transport other sea creatures around. So why not humans, right? Jake thinks that it would be amazing and he could ride baby harbor seals around town. Haley thinks if you lived on a boat, you would probably get sick a lot and would have to be very smart to figure out how to get vitamin C in the water. This is a great question. So you may be able to get fish from the water, but how about all of the nutrients you need to live? Do you even know what those nutrients are if you're living on land? It would be really cool and I could snorkel with the plankton, says Luke. And Aiden says, we would sink by now, and how would we build new buildings? How are we going to grow crops? Plus, a shark might bump into us. I'd be really curious to hear what your thoughts would be if we all lived on floating cities. Now, for an activity, what if you design your own floating city? Imagine you've been asked to design a floating city for yourself and 269 of your closest friends. While you wouldn't be permanently cut off from ever visiting land again, there are some things you probably wouldn't want to live without. What kind of shops, services, and amenities would you want on your floating city? What kinds of things should you include to make land lovers want to give up their lives as they know them and settle permanently on your sea city? So really curious what you could do with this question, not only coming up with other questions and learning more about everything from aquatic life to nutrition for humans, but who would you invite to live on your floating city? And what would it be like? Design your neighborhood, describe the shops and the people and the activities that would happen on your floating series, on your floating city. As always, thank you for your curiosity. Really curious to see what you come up with, what you learn and discover around the question of what if humans lived on floating cities. Thanks again and stay curious.